Hello and welcome to a special holiday edition of Power and Politics. I'm David Cochran. 2025 saw Canadian politics turn on its head. The Liberals said goodbye to Justin Trudeau and hello to Mark Carney. And Carney led the party to a win in the federal election, just 3 seats shy of a majority. And as the Liberals welcomed their new leader, the Conservatives said goodbye to their double-digit lead in the polls. What once looked like an inevitable election win became a 4th straight loss, one that ended in Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre losing his seat in the House of Commons. Meanwhile, the NDP has just 7 MPs after its worst election result ever. With Jagmeet Singh gone, the party is now in search of its next leader. Well, to dive into the year ahead and check the political pulse of those 3 political parties, I'm joined by our 3 political insiders. We've got Melanie, she's a former communications director for the NDP. Greg MacEachern is a former Liberal ministerial advisor. And Fred DeLorey is a former Conservative campaign manager. Good to see you all. Thanks for spending some of your holiday time with us. And during this show, we're going to assess the state of each of their parties and then pick some issues to watch in 2026. So let's start with the governing Liberals.
I cannot be the one to carry the Liberal standard into the next election.
I'm back home in Edmonton to declare my candidacy for leader of the Liberal Party. I know we need change. Big change. I'm asking for your vote to stand up to Donald Trump.
Canada's next government will be a Liberal government.
Will you be pursuing a formal governing pact of any kind with the NDP?
No.
And why not?
Why? As you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale. We will only sign a deal that's the right deal, that's a good deal for Canada.
How many seats do you need to have a majority?
I can't remember. So call your local MP if they're not a Liberal and tell them.
Best deal in the world, strongest budget in the world.
Building with Alberta, building with Canada, building for today, but building very much for the future.
If there's not a private sector component, there won't be a pipeline.
Our newest member of the Liberal Party, Michael Ma.
So what could next year look like for the Liberals? Greg, let's start with you. You're in a much different headspace than a year ago. All the Liberals you talk to in these year-end conversations are like that Survivor contestant that won the challenge in week 10, and they get to eat good food for the first time. What are you watching for with your party for next year?
Well, I mean, there's a saying in politics, a week is an eternity, a year. This is incredibly different. Space for the Liberals. There was a saying during the pandemic that governments were building the plane while flying it. I think the Liberals, changed pilots, but it ended up being a very, very different looking plane. And a lot of responses to things that have been, points of criticism towards the Liberals for a long time around things like, the country's ability to build, the country's ability to recognize that the economy has had a major threat thanks to the President of the United States. So incredible change. A lot of the things that we were hearing, in 2024, I spoke about how when I'd leave Ottawa, people would tell me very clearly if they knew, identified Liberal or they knew us from this panel, that they weren't very happy with Justin Trudeau, but they had concerns about Pierre Poilievre. Well, the election of 2025 really, gave us proof of that.
Yeah, so Fred, it's a completely different political dynamic as Parliament shuts down and the year winds down in 2025. I mean, what do you think is the big thing for the Liberals looking ahead to 2026? I mean, the hunt, as we speak, because this is taped, they're still 1 seat short of a majority. I guess that's the big target for them.
Well, yeah, they're in a situation right now in a minority parliament that they're so close to that majority. But going back to a year ago to Justin Trudeau and the decade that he was prime minister, this is not the Liberal Party of Justin Trudeau. This is a complete shift. And that's the resiliency and the brand of the Liberal Party is fascinating, that they're able to shift like that. They don't hold values that are dear to themselves. And that is sometimes an electoral system, a benefit, but also a risk. Where does that go in the future? Can they hold whatever coalition that they currently have together when you're not really rooted in anything?
Well, they're rooted in holding on to power and surviving, right, Mel? I mean, this is the criticism New Democrats and Conservatives who become more ideological over time have for the Liberals, but it worked in 2025. What do you see looking ahead to the next year for them?
Yeah, it worked in 2025. I think particularly because we had Donald Trump and this massive threat looming over us, and Mark Carney was the person who folks thought was the person to respond to that. They knew who Pierre Poilievre was. They didn't like him as much as maybe they did leading up to this for somebody to go up against Donald Trump. They didn't think Jagmeet was credible to go up against Donald Trump. And Mark Carney not only seemed to be credible, people didn't actually know who he was. So all of their hopes, all of their dreams of who he could be, both as a prime minister, but also as somebody going up against Trump, they put on him, right? I think the challenge now is we're coming close to a year of him being prime minister. That hope starts to go away if you're not seeing concrete deliverables, if you're not seeing things shift with the U.S., if you're not seeing these, these big announcements, these big builds start to concretely impact your life. I think the hope or the goodwill that people had and have consistently had with the prime minister since he's been elected as leader, but also since he won the election, I think starts to go away if you're not seeing my life is benefiting with him as prime minister. And I think that's the reason that people liked Mark Carney is he kept saying, enough talking, let's do. Well, we need to see the do.
Okay, I just want to go back to Fred on this because Fred, those are all the vulnerabilities that they face going into the next year, but there needs to be a receptacle for the support, right? And right now, Mark Carney is still light years ahead of everybody else as prime minister. So is it really just all about him right now? Is he the reason why the Liberals are there and where they are? Is it all on Mark Carney?
It's absolutely him, and it is the idea of him. It's not necessarily Mark Carney. It's what Canadians think he could be. Yeah. They really don't know him. He came out of, I know we've been talking about him for a few years, but a lot of Canadians were just really introduced to him last year, or the beginning of this year. His resume is exciting for Canadians. Yeah. They look at him as someone who's incredibly accomplished. The fact that he was a central banker and a senior person at a major asset company, Brookfield, that plays very, very well. Canadians, I think they're proud that we have a prime minister that has this type of background, but there's vulnerability there if he doesn't deliver, if he doesn't show something, and that's where the risks are if he doesn't deliver on everything that the way expectations currently are.
So Greg, the Prime Minister unquestionably delivered for the Liberals in 2025. There is this test in 2026 of the things he started to move on, gaining traction quickly in 2026 and delivering for Canadians. What are you watching for there? How quickly does that need to happen, do you think?
There's always with the Liberal Party, it's a very different makeup than the Conservatives or the NDP. And I do hear from some people who perhaps have not been watching politics for as long as me, but that this move to the right, I think there's a lot of Liberals out there that feel that this is a move back to the center. And this is closer to the governments of Chrétien and Mulroney and Paul Martin and in some aspects even Stephen Harper, where it's assuming the center. And I think this is where a lot of Liberals want to see the party go. I think they had a big challenge internally with the MOU. Who would have thought a year ago that a Liberal Prime Minister and Danielle Smith would be signing a deal? And it happened. And again, whatever my personal feelings are about the practices of the Premier of Alberta, most Canadians want to see their governments working together. And I think there's a series of premiers who have realized this, Doug Ford, Tim Houston, that this is what Canadians want right now. We survived a really, really tough year, thanks to Donald Trump. And, as the year closed, Donald Trump's power seemed to be, not what it once was. And there was mid-December, there was this story from Vanity Fair where his own chief of staff acknowledged that the tariffs were a pain point for them. Yeah. That is a big deal.
Yeah, there's data out now showing that Canada added more jobs since Liberation Day than the United States, which is remarkable when you consider things. But I wonder, Mel, just on where this government is right now. There's a lot of talk about Mark Carney's a right-wing government. He's moved in. It's definitely, unquestionably, more conservative than it was under Justin Trudeau, who tacked aggressively to the left as the Conservatives went to the right. Is this a right-wing government? Is it a centrist government? Or has he landed on the consensus, just gone to where the data would tell you this is where Canadians are? It seems like they've kind of landed in that sweet spot. I don't know.
No, definitely. It feels like, I obviously have some criticism of the current Prime Minister and the government, but what it seems like is a will to collaborate, a will to, instead of throw punches, to find a way to make it work. You talked about Premier Smith. Throughout this whole, Premier Smith, Premier Mill may have said some things about the Prime Minister. he didn't necessarily take the bait. We see the same thing with
no
Donald
culture
Trump.
wars anymore.
Yeah,
federal, provincially,
exactly.
right?
And you see the same thing with Donald Trump. And mind you, I think a lot of folks at home are then wondering, well, then what are your values if you're not standing up strong? But at the same point, on the opposite side, you're seeing somebody who is finding a way to work with people who he may not necessarily agree with. So I think you're right when you say, has he found the consensus? I think a lot of what he's talking about is stuff that people are in a place to accept. You talked about the MOU. Fast forward a few years, I think that would have been awful. I think you would have seen the kind of protests we saw in 2019 over the climate. This would not have been at all something that resonated with Canadian values. And I think what you're seeing now is an openness to invest in Canada, an openness to do things differently because folks are worried about, what could be coming from the U.S. So I think he's meeting that moment with some of the things that he's doing for sure.
So Fred, this is what I wonder about, right? Like, got to deliver. Big promises made. The expectations management has been to manage them through the roof. But if you're straddling that consensus of where the bulk of Canadians are mentally and ideologically, that seems to me could buy you some time.
Absolutely. Again, Canadians want him to succeed, and I think he's going to get a lot of leeway to do so, particularly when he's dealing with President Trump, who's not known to be necessarily an honest broker. So he has that room and time to establish and get something done, but he has to do it eventually. But Carney fits the time right now. Like, he's the type of liberal that may not have done well in previous elections, but right now where people are super focused on the economy. Go back to 2015 when Stephen Harper was defeated. He was focused on the economy. The economy was very solid then. Things were in a good spot. It wasn't a top issue for people then. They weren't worried about their jobs as much as they are now. So when you have that shift, there's the risk where your core messages line up. For Carney, his core messages fit the day very well.
So Greg, just quickly, I mean, he has made this shift and change in the direction, focus, and nature of the government, thrown some things overboard along the way. Is there a risk of people going overboard? I mean, you'll wonder about some of the constituencies in Quebec, the Lower Mainland of British Columbia. Where do you see as just questionable spots for the Liberals right now?
Well, I think the near-death experience of the Liberals is the sobering factor here. If you're a Liberal member of Parliament from some of those areas, if you had run under Justin Trudeau, you probably wouldn't be in Parliament. Pierre Poilievre might have had a majority. And what would have things looked like then? I think the MOU, the fact that the Conservatives want to leave out certain language, was a bit of a lesson for some of the Liberals that might have been a bit nervous, saying, I'm not, entirely happy with this, but if it had been the Conservatives, this would have been terrible.
Okay. All right, up next, we're going to talk about the Conservatives and what's in the mix for the official opposition in 2026. Stay right there. We just talked about the Liberals, so let's turn to the Conservatives. Leader Pierre Poilievre will face a leadership review in the new year, this just months after two Conservative MPs crossed the floor to the Liberals and another announced he's quitting politics altogether.
If we had a carbon tax election now, we could elect a strong, stable, national majority government. They're all just like Justin.
Who is ready to vote for change in Canada?
If you told me that we would get 41% of the vote and still not win, I would have said, you're crazy.
What I think you're going to see from Mr. Carney is more big promises without any action.
I've never really been a spectator of the House.
Thank you very much to the great people of Battle River Crowfoot.
My mother taught me never to be late, so please forgive me for my late arrival to the session.
He's even worse than Justin Trudeau. There have been more tariffs and rising tariffs, contrary to Mr. Carney's own promises.
Any of the scandals of the Trudeau era should have been involved jail time. I mean, Trudeau broke the criminal code when he took a free vacation.
Isn't this pipeline going to be built in the year never?
Here we are, no deal, no win, no elbows, and no jobs.
All right, our party insiders are back. Melanie Richer, Greg MacEachern, and Fred DeLorey. Fred, 2025 did not go the way the Conservatives had hoped and expected. What do they need to do in 2026?
They need to find their voice and what actually that is. What are they standing for, and how are they dealing with a Carney progressive conservative government? Or sorry, liberal, I guess you're calling it. But this is we're in the situation where the Liberals have adapted to the moment. And I think the Conservatives are still trying to find who they are and how they deal with Carney. I think what I said right after the election when we were on here, they need to be prosecuting him, looking at everything he's doing, go with that type of mantra in the House of Commons, instead of, we keep talking about Justin Trudeau, we keep talking about they're stealing our ideas. Yeah, they're stealing them, but instead of acting as if they're not good ideas, we should be saying, yeah, these were good ideas and they're taking them. The carbon tax comes to mind. When Carney signed that out of existence on day one, we went and the Conservatives went out and tried to make this weird argument that it's not really gone, there's still a legislative process, and Poilievre should have done a victory lap on that, because it was Poilievre who made carbon tax a bad word in this country. He should have been doing that sort of thing. So I think there's a lot of figuring out that has to happen, and how you deal with Carney has got to be the number one issue.
Yeah, Mel, Fred's onto something there. There's a lot of backwards looking, like still litigating the last election, and you see in the clip pack we played there, they're all just like Justin, like completely missed where Mark Carney was going with this, right? So where do they need to kind of settle as Carney has, moved to the right and settled in the center of the consensus here?
I think Fred's exactly right. Figure out what is it that you stand for these days. What is the thing that you're talking about? How are you not necessarily making noise, because I don't think that's right, but what is it that you're talking about? What is your message? What are the values that you still stick to? Going back into the last election or the last years just seems to remind folks that you lost and you didn't have what it took to become Prime Minister. I also think that when we talked about the Prime Minister, we talked about how he seems to be meeting the moment for where people are at. And I think a lot of that is the seriousness of the Prime Minister. I think he's a serious guy who is serious in the way that he talks, and he doesn't do these like glib little jokes all the time. And the clip that we were seeing since the election, it's like Pierre Poilievre hasn't figured that out. He's still the same guy, which okay, maybe that's who he is genuinely, but the quick little jokes or the unseriousness of this moment, it just seems like this isn't going to work. And worse, it's not going to work. If you think you're going to try to run the same election and get the same result, which to their credit was a good result, even if they didn't pull off the win, I think that's a mistake. I think you're up against a different leader. You're up against a different feeling. There were so many people who wanted change in the last election. I don't know that people feel that way right now. So to think that you're going to have, the same luck not luck, but to have the same circumstances next time, I think is a mistake. So figuring out what is it that you need to say going into the next one, I think is really important.
Yeah, Canadians, Greg, clearly want to change in the dying days of the Trudeau era, and Mark Carney gave them change that they were comfortable with. So what's your sense of what to expect in 2026 from Pierre Poilievre as he faces a review, and who knows if anyone else defects to the Liberals?
I think Pierre Poilievre has defined himself as not being Justin Trudeau. And that is 2024. And it's 2020, it's a year later, and he still seems to be looking backwards. And I remember sitting in this very chair the day that Chrystia Freeland announced her resignation. We watched it over the monitor on our shoulders, And when Pierre Poilievre started talking, he started talking about Mark Carney. And as Fred said earlier, a lot of Canadians might not have known who he was at that time. But his messages at the time were about Carney. And I was thinking to myself, dear God, like the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance just resigned. This is a huge blow to my party. And he's talking about Mark Carney and, the light bulb.
He knew what was coming, I think, right?
Well, but also, I don't know about that. I just think he can't pivot. And so I will give him, Pierre Poilievre, full marks for going on shows like Rosie Barton's at CBC and other networks, because in January you and I had a little set-to about Pierre Poilievre not doing sit-down interviews with English national broadcasters. And I think if it was the right thing to do, why is he doing it now? And I'll give him full marks. It was a rough week, and he still showed up to do those interviews. But the fact that they had a ban on going on CBC, and after they lost the election, Conservative MPs started showing up here again. I had a Conservative MP tell me to my face that was one of the things that upset them very much, because they felt that their constituents watched the CBC and they were being kept from a chance to communicate with them. So the guy has taken a long time. We were told in the summer that he was going to change his tone. Whether that was wishful thinking by his advisors, we don't know. But he's taken a long time to get to the places that he ought to already be at. Yeah. And I don't think that, the arc of this is not going in a great direction for him.
No, it's a tough spot to be in, Fred, right? When you're well below your party, you were going to win and you didn't, right? And you lost your seat. Now you face a leadership review with your rival on the cusp of a majority as we're doing this. But, going back to finding their voice, The role in Parliament as the official opposition, there's a difference between opposing and obstructing, and that's a calibration. And one looks serious and one looks gimmicky. And you know, does that matter in the big scheme of things, you think, for the electorate?
Well, look, I don't know how much the electorate's following all of that tightly in terms of Parliament itself. But like going back to the MOU with Alberta, we came out. You know, the deal was signed, and Conservatives were kind of opposed to certain parts of it, and it was this weird, wonky thing. And then they did this gimmicky, like, bring it to the House of Commons and have a motion. I don't think it had to be gimmicky. I think they could have done a straight up, here's the MOU, we support it. The problem is they didn't fully support it. The Conservatives
there's
don't
a carbon
fully,
tax in it.
There's parts of it that they have issue with. So they got cute with it, and you do not do cute well. When you do that, it blows up on you, and you don't look serious. And to Mel's point earlier, like, this is a serious moment. People are looking for serious leadership, and when we look like we're playing games and not putting an actual strong, solid, legitimate, helpful foot forward, then we don't belong in government.
So, Mel, he has this leadership review in the final week end of January coming up. We don't know where the seat count is going to be by then. I still, no matter what it is, I think Pierre Poilievre at this point stands to win that probably with a reasonably good number. But if Mark Carney gets his majority, does Pierre Poilievre last until the next election, do you think?
I mean, if I was a Conservative, no, but I'm not a Conservative, so I think it depends what those folks think. I can't imagine, if another Conservative MP crosses over and gives Mark Carney his leadership, I don't know what that caucus sees is helpful in Pierre Poilievre at that point. To me, that is a flagrant show of non-confidence in the leader. So I don't know how you continue to support the leader if that happens and you're no longer in a minority government. If you're moving to majority government, we're in this for quite a few years. So it may not be right away, but I would expect that it would come soon after. And again, the interesting thing about Conservatives is, I think we talked about this a few weeks ago, they have adopted, and I forget again what it's called. The Reform Act, thank you. So caucus actually can put a leader out the door, different than the other caucuses. So it doesn't just need to rest with the membership in January, it can rest with caucus too.
Yes, but if the defections continue, Greg, the people who would vote against him are going to be Liberals, right? So maybe it increases his survivability. I talked to Conservatives about this before the holidays, and they think maybe there's enough people in the caucus to trigger a vote, but not enough to force him out. Like, you know, the loyalty levels are still high. The top line party number is still very high. You know, the Conservative brand is still strong. The leadership is more of a question. So just on that point, if Carney can get his majority, because we know he's hunting for it, do you think Pierre Poilievre will last until a federal election that might not be until 2029?
No. So it's funny, that strong, stable, national majority, that is a Stephen Harper line.
Yeah.
And it was funny, in preparing for our panel, I wondered about that line, if Carney was slowly working towards it. In mid-November, we were told by Conservative pundits, and not our good friend Fred here, that the floor crossing was over and that Liberals, it was overblown and Liberals were raising
Liberals thought it was over too.
Well, I mean, never say never.
Yeah, I know.
And the cards were kept very close to the vest on Michael Ma's floor crossing. So I would be, for example, the Conservative MP I just mentioned, very unhappy, not going to be a floor crosser for sure. But what happens when you get into that booth? The Flora syndrome from the PC leadership of 1976, the number of declared delegates for Flora MacDonald did not match the vote. That is always a risk at these things.
Right. Yeah, the people learned two things with Michael Ma. There was an MP named Michael Ma because he was brand new and hadn't had profile, and that he was crossing the floor. But, Fred, the Harper slogan reference there, Mark Carney governs a lot more like Stephen Harper than he governed like Justin Trudeau. And, there's a quiet sort of ruthlessness there in sort of going, they're more playing catcher than pitcher on the floor crossings, but now with one left, maybe that changes. Do you think if it gets to there, that Poilievre can last until the next election? Is there that kind of patience and staying power? It's a tough spot for him to be in.
It's tough. The membership seems to be very much with him. The party is with him. The caucus is like a massive percentage is with him. I think it's up to him. I think it's going to be Poilievre looking at this. If he does not lead the party into the next election, it'll ultimately be his decision, not anyone else's. Now, it'll be influenced by what's going on, and if Carney gets a majority government, there's no question that is damaging. If he gets it squarely from Conservatives crossing. If a Dipper or a Blackies cross, then maybe that changes the game a bit. But it's certainly damaging to Poilievre when people are leaving. There's no question that happens. But I do think it's going to come down to where he is in this. And from all accounts, he plans on going to the next election. Yeah. And he goes back to the point where, you know, he got over 40-some% of the vote in the last election. The last 10 days, I thought they campaigned very, very well. So if he just thinks he can get back to that moment, back to a campaign, even if you've got to go through all of the hardship, you got to go through all of this. Now, if it's 2029, that's hard to...
Yeah, it's a different thing.
Leader of the opposition is tough. It's tough to lose an election that you thought you were losing the whole time, but to know that you were 30 points up at one point, then lost, that's tough.
That's tough to get over. And look, he's not doing interviews, as Greg said, with Rosie and people at the CBC if he's looking to go, right? He's doing that because he's determined to stay. All right, we've looked into our crystal balls for the Liberals and the Conservatives. What's in the mix for the NDP in 2026? Stick around and find out. That's next. We've gone over the Liberals and the Conservatives. Now, what's in the mix for the NDP in 2026? Well, that party is still recovering from its worst election result in history and is in search of its next leader.
Our country works best when one party doesn't have all the power. We're in it for you.
We need New Democrats now more than ever.
Obviously, I know this night is a disappointing night for New Democrats. I'll be stepping down as party leader as soon as an interim leader can be appointed.
We are going to be voting no to the throne speech.
We've been very clear about the kinds of things that would have to be in that budget to earn our support.
I look to the Carney government in 2026 to demonstrate that they understand they're in a minority parliament.
We have two conservative parties in this country right now, and only the New Democrats are bringing a progressive lens and voice.
I'm running to bring the NDP back to its roots.
We were built by farmers and urban workers coming together, and we need to reconnect with both.
Fling the doors open and build a party for the 99%.
There's an opportunity right now for the NDP to reimagine what a bold progressive option looks like for Canadians.
All right, our party insiders are back. Melanie Richer, Greg MacEachern, and Fred DeLorey. Mel, a lot of soul searching going on in your party, but a lot of space opened up on the left-leaning part of the Canadian electorate. Who do you think is going to emerge from the pack to lead that?
That's a really great question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think obviously what we're seeing is there's maybe three top runners right now between Avi Lewis, Heather McPherson, and Rob Ashton. So I would assume that one of those folks leads. I obviously have my preferred person that I'll maybe keep it to myself for now. But I think what's important is exactly what you talked about, the space that is opening up. And I would say I don't even think that it's just the, quote unquote progressive space that's opening up. I think that there's two spaces that are opening up. I think with the Prime Minister moving to the center, I think that there's as an opportunity to be the progressive voice. But I also think that with the Prime Minister being who he is and the things that he's talking about and the things that he's doing, I think there's a massive opportunities to win that worker base back. I think there's a massive opportunity to go get, the roots of what our party was founded on and bring them back into the party. I think that's one of the important parts of the soul searching is how do we talk to people in a way that they see themselves reflected, they see themselves understood. And I think with the Prime Minister who folks really like because he's serious, because he has the background that he has, the resume that he has, but they can't really connect with the Prime Minister because of that background. They don't necessarily have the same background. So I think that there's a massive opportunity to go talk to those folks and bring them in. I think Pierre Poilievre was successful in doing that leading up to the next election until the election happened. I think some of the candidates that we have in the leadership are able to talk to those folks and bring them back in. So I think that's a massive opportunity on top of the progressive voter base, and I hope that that's what we see coming out of this leadership race.
Right. So, Greg, you got a situation where Mark Carney commands all this respect, but the relatability is an opportunity for whoever leads the Democrats, as Mel says. I mean, when you look at where they are and the potential, going after some of the left flank of the Liberal coalition, who do you see emerging from this as maybe the biggest threat here?
Well, the three names that Mel just mentioned, I mean, one would take the NDP far more left, and I don't think that's appealing.
That's Avi Lewis you're talking about?
Avi Lewis.
Yeah.
I think Heather would probably be status quo. She's been a solid MP. Ashton, I think, probably would have more appeal to where the NDP used to be. But to me, where the NDP, if I was advising them, I'd be saying, you need to talk to your provincial people. Because federally, David Thurton had a great story in May, revealed how much the NDP how much resources they put into Jagmeet Singh's riding. They flew 20 people in, and he came third. And Peter Julian was next door and lost by 2,000. There was a bunch of other candidates that could have used that help and support. So if I was in the NDP, I'd be asking questions about who made those calls, because the expectation was that Singh was going to resign regardless whether he won his seat or not. He had been leader, I think, for about 8 years. So if you look provincially, they're in power in BC and in Manitoba. They're the official opposition in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, Nova Scotia. Talk to those people. Carla Beck is probably very well positioned to be premier if they run a good campaign. The NDP should be talking to their success stories.
Well, part of the challenge, I guess, Fred, though, is like the provincial campaigns tend to be binary, where it's the NDP versus a more conservative option, and they get swept up in the vote splitting and regionalism nationally, and like, I don't know who's best positioned for that. I get kind of John Horgan vibes from a guy like Rob Ashton, you know, but I don't know if he can capture the national mood. I mean, what's your sense of where they are right now as they look at the next leader?
Well, there's nowhere to go but up. So that's where they are.
You know, I mean, don't tease her that way.
They will not go lower.
Yeah.
They will not go lower.
No,
I will be very strong in that view. I think it's what story are they going to tell? Who are they, and how do they appeal in this new dynamic where you have a conservative and a progressive conservative fighting it out for government? Where can they lean in and tell their story that gets enough votes? You know, there's the whole Trump issue that's still here that kind of drives things away from them. No one is thinking they're a choice that can deal with the Trump factor.
You're not running to be prime minister, right? That's
which
the challenge.
Which they don't usually do, right? But it's what role can they play? You know, to Melanie's point earlier, like a lot of what hurt the NDP was NDP voters moving to the Liberals, but not in enough spot to stop the Conservatives. They moved to the Liberals because they didn't want Conservatives to win. Conservatives ended up winning a ton of seats because of that. So they got to figure out that message and how do they communicate it, and who's a strong enough leader to appeal to a big mass. Avi Lewis, I think, would drive them further to the left, as Greg had mentioned. I fully agree. The guy wants to nationalize grocery stores. I think that's going to be problematic for a lot of people.
Does he want to nationalize or does he want a public option grocery store? Like, you know, like a parallel public system. I don't know if that's a distinction that matters, but I hear it.
Two-tiered groceries.
That's kind of what he's talking about. Yeah.
So, and defund military and other things. I just think if they take an extreme position like that, or a leader that's on the extreme left, I think they're going to have a harder time rebuilding their party than if they take a McPherson or an Ashton, who I think may be able to tell a story that could peel off votes from the other parties.
I guess there's the challenge, Mel, in that there is the mood of the country in this moment, and then there's the mood of the country for the next election and maybe the election after, because it's not going to unlikely to be a one-election rebuild back from 7 seats, maybe official party status. So how do you think the party members and voters for the leadership have to consider that?
Well, my response to that is, why do we keep losing? And the response that comes to mind to me is the credibility factor. And if you look at Jagmeet in, maybe not this election, but if you look at Jagmeet in 2021 and 2019, he was everybody's favorite leader to go for coffee with, to go for a drink with. That's who people picked. But when you looked at credibility, he was the least credible. And the problem for us is we don't have a credible party. If the Liberal leader is not doing well, the Liberal Party brand is usually pretty strong. Same thing with the Conservatives. We don't have, federally, forget provincially, we don't have the same party credibility to lean on. That was one of the reasons for the supply and confidence agreement, was how do you build credibility if you don't have the opportunity to govern? This was maybe a path. Now, we'll figure out in a few years from now if that was a good path or not when we take a look at everything. But I think you need to be credible. So whether or not the mood changes of what is now versus what it'll be like in a few years, I think we still have that credibility problem. And how is a way to fix that? I think it's by being able to connect with people, to talk to people, and to show people that you're
Isn't that what Jagmeet did, but people didn't find him credible? You know what I mean? Like the solution and the problem, are they the same?
No, I don't know that in the same way. I think one of the, again, Jagmeet is one of my favorite people, but I think one of the problems with Jagmeet is there was always a little bit of a, not necessarily a confidence issue, but a speaking confidently on things that you expect your leader to be speaking on. And I think that there was some messaging issues there. There was some ability to take up that space and talk about it credibly. He's a very intelligent person. I don't know that that ever came across the way that you would expect it to for your leader. And I think that's one of the credibility issues. I also think that the things that we talk about as a party for our members versus the things that we talk about to regular people, it doesn't always match. And I think that that's something that we need to figure out. I think it's a problem for a lot of progressives. We saw it in the States also. This idea of like, we talk about these big things, we talk about the value stuff, but we forget that people's number one issues is having a roof over their head and food on the table. So we need to find a way to do both. And I think that comes back to the credibility and being able to talk to people in a way that people talk. And hopefully that's something the next leader can manage.
Okay, quickly, I don't want to say who you think should win. Who do you think will win?
I think Avi may win.
Avi may win?
My NDP friends would say the same.
Avi Lewis?
We're going to go McPherson just to go against.
Just to be the outlier, as always. Okay, all right, there we go. 2 for Avi Lewis, not endorsements, but predictions. All right, up next, our Party Insiders break down what they are going to be watching for next year. Stay right there. We'll be right back. We've been going over what to expect in the year ahead for the Liberals, Conservatives, and the NDP, but we're also going to open the floor to our party insiders to highlight some issues. We've got Melanie, Greg MacEachern, and Fred DeLorey. What are they watching for in 2026? Mel, let's start with you. Your eyes are squarely on what's going to happen in Parliament.
Yes, I think I'm taking a look at the stability of Parliament. You know, obviously we've got Conservative floor crossers, and maybe we get more in the new year, but we haven't really passed anything. A lot of stuff is stuck at committee. Conservatives have majority on half of the committees, and it's not necessarily going well. So seeing how the Prime Minister is able to work with other parties to get stuff done is what I'm paying attention to.
Greg, he seems to be working with other parties to steal their members. That seems to be the modus operandi right now.
Committees will work a lot smoother that way. There were a couple of bills that almost could have been passed. I think it's not even at committee. It's not letting at second reading vote collapse so that it'll go to committee and the bills can be worked on. There's lots of bills, or I shouldn't say there was lots of bills, but there were bills that were amended. Right. There is signs of hope there, but this is more at the committee process as opposed to the entire House.
Yeah, well, and Fred, like Brookfield Assets Management did do mergers and acquisitions, and he's taking that into Parliament as he's trying to merge and acquire. I mean, do we think he gets the majority because it would allow him just to focus on what he wants to do and not worry about what happens in Parliament?
I think he's going to definitely try, and there's 2 ways to do that. There's to peel members from the opposition to cross, which he's done. He's got 2 so far.
Yep.
There's also an election, and I think if he doesn't feel, if things are still bogged down, he has 1 piece of legislation passed in the House in the last year.
Right.
If he wants to get anything done, he may have to go to the people and ask for a majority government in an election.
There's a third way if Matt Jenneru does resign. There's a by-election potentially at Edmonton Riverbend, and who knows with the MOE if you can win there. Greg, speaking of elections, your eyes on the midterm elections, which don't happen until November of 2026.
November 3rd, first Tuesday, traditionally doesn't go very well for the governing party, the president. It's a massive election. Usually it's a third of the Senate. There'll be 35 actually this time because of a couple of special appointments. All the Democrats need to take over the Senate is 4 seats, the House 3 seats. There's 39 governors elections up. And we know that in December, Donald Trump was having a lot of trouble. There was a really massive public reaction, and even his own people, that this really unkind things he said about the deaths of Rob Reiner. And that is somebody that, you know, from baby boomers to millennials, people would be familiar with. It's amazing what kind of breaks through. But all of that counts on the Democrats getting their act together.
Right, and Fred, I mean, November, that's a long way away. That's basically as much time as Trump has been president, you know, if you put it in that mindset. But it's a key check on his power potentially.
Absolutely. What happens there is, you know, you elect the entire House of Representatives, and if right now it is a Republican majority, if it shifts to the Democrats, which the polls suggest it will or may, that could bind Trump in many ways and how he deals with things, and it changes the game. And, you know, you made the comment about how Trump is the government. In the U.S., their system is very different. Their House of Representatives is the government as well. They run things at a very different than we do here in Canada, where if the Democrats take control of the House, they are in government now. And that, you know, could really change the dynamic with Trump and all of his tariff issues that he's having around the world.
Yeah, but the executive orders, his failure to respect basic norms and jurisdiction, Mel, still, I mean, it could help, but it's not going to solve the Trump challenge, right, no matter what happens.
Yeah, I feel like it's been a year of having my expectations of, okay, this is as bad bad as it's going to get, and then something else happens. So you almost get a little bit numb to everything that happens with President Trump as it relates to Canada, as it relates to that relationship, and particularly trade. So I would hope that if Democrats were able to be successful with midterms, it tampers it down a little bit. Unfortunately, I think what we've seen is just that this is somebody who's unpredictable and not necessarily reasonable. And does that make it worse? Maybe. I hope not. I hope that the Democrats are successful and things balance out a little bit as it relates to our relationship with them. But I have gotten my hopes up before as it relates to that relationship, and I don't want to break my own heart.
Yeah, no, you have to wonder what happens with ICE and raids and polling stations and all of these things. And you know, nothing as dramatic as that in Canada, Fred, but there is a big election coming up in Quebec. Pablo Rodriguez resigning as the leader of the Quebec Liberal Party, the Parti Québécois leading in the polls in that October vote, right?
Yeah, so this year we're going into a Quebec election. The Parti Québécois, over the last couple of decades really, has been a party that competes for government just to try to lead the government, to govern the province. But now they've put separatism back in the front window. They've now made it very clear, their new leader, Saint-Pierre Plamondon, that is at the core of what he wants to accomplish, is bringing Quebec out of Canada. And he's made it very clear that if he becomes premier, they are going to have a referendum as soon as possible and throw everything into chaos once again for the third time in this country.
Yeah, a sovereignty referendum potentially in 2027 if the PQ win in 2026, Greg. You know, an existential threat to Canada potentially.
Yeah, and for any prime minister at that time, I'm saying that because currently we're in a minority. Events, dear boy, events. I was at the referendum rally in 1995. I hoped we would not ever have to see something like that again. And I just hope that the Quebec Liberals can follow the example of the Ontario PCs and do a leadership really, really quickly and turn things around. Lots of things can happen, but Fred rightly points out that this begs a lot of questions about what happens to our country's future if we're now talking about, whether or not Quebec stays in Canada again. Yeah.
Mel, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, what's interesting is in this context, there isn't really a Quebec voice against separatism, particularly with Rodriguez resigning. There isn't really anybody that can go up against Plamondon in this election in a credible way to take on that idea, because then you would maybe have an interesting debate or an interesting race to see where Quebecers really feels. And the interesting thing about separatism in Quebec is it's not like a right-wing issue or a left-wing issue. It's pretty like...
it's identity, right?
It's identity, right. So you see a lot of progressive voices, Quebec Solidaire. All of that is fascinating. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And it'll be interesting to see what Prime Minister Mark Carney does in response, or who he lines up as a champion to take on, the opposite of separating in that conversation.
Yeah, like the Prime Minister, we're skipping ahead a few steps here, right? But, as it exists right now, I mean, the Prime Minister obviously can't outsource national unity, but, in 1995, Chrétien was a Quebecer, Paul Martin, Lassalle-Mard, Jean Charest was the national conservative leader. You had those voices, but also the media ecosystem was different. There was no social media, right? The misinformation challenges and a binary referendum, as we saw with Brexit, comes into play. And Fred, we have a president of the United States that would benefit from instability in Canada and go back to all the things 2025 was about, right?
Right, but go back to last year, the beginning of last year, when Trump started talking about Canada as a 51st state. It was at a Montreal Canadiens game where the O Canada broke out, and that was just randomly in a game. So there is Canadian patriotism, which is very solid in Quebec, and Trump helps that in that way, and that he, I think it calls to people that, hey, we've got a great thing going on with this country, so let's keep it.
Yeah, Greg, the algorithms, they're a pernicious, powerful, divisive force on people's phones, right? And in a binary choice, I wonder if the country is truly prepared for what could be coming.
Yeah, and I talked about this before, that ROC, the rest of Canada, doesn't understand that Quebec has a star system, has an entire cultural system that, yes, maybe there are actors and singers from France, but there is a lot of homegrown that we've had to really push and create things like CanCon, so we're familiar with our artists. And so that was huge for the first referendum and for the second. But they're also facing now, as you said, people aren't watching media in traditional ways, and misinformation and disinformation has crept in so greatly. So there's a whole aspect to this that I'm not sure Canadians, because it's been a generation since the last one, fully understand.
Yeah, and Mel, just we got about 30, 40 seconds. Stephen Guilbeault in cabinet would be very helpful in a moment like this, right? You know, keeping Melanie Joly and others, you know, at the forefront of your movement. They're the ones in your ads, and they can carry your message in Quebec in a moment like this.
Absolutely. And their criticism, while important, and you want them to be able to criticize the government, kind of elevates that feeling a little bit. We saw that from Stephen Guilbeault with his pronouncements of he thinks that this will make separatism worse. But you've also seen it with, you know, folks in opposition saying, well, what does Carney's decision mean for Quebec? Like that, you want to be able to criticize the Prime Minister, but that also kind of elevates the temperature a little bit.
Yeah, it's been a lot of focus the last couple of years on Alberta, and I think 2026 we go back to really wondering what's happening in the province of Quebec.